I'm going to show you how to be assertive in conversations without being seen as aggressive. While we're at it, I'll show you how to avoid being overly submissive, which can also be a problem for people who struggle with assertiveness. This video is part 2 in a 5-part series on assertive communication skills, and I'll put links to all of those parts as I post them in the description below this video. We're going to cover this in 3 points. We're going to talk about the tendency some people have for one-upping, which usually comes across as aggressive. We'll talk about an assertive style of communication, which is called one-across, and we'll talk about communicating in a one-down position, which is submissive. So let's start with what many aggressive communicators do so that you can learn to recognize this and avoid it. And we call it one-upping. I'm sure you've seen this in conversations. Maybe you've done it yourself. One-upping is a communication term that we use to describe when at least one person is attempting to assert a level of control over the conversation, over the other person, or the conversational outcomes. And this takes various shapes. We see one-upping happen with our friends, our enemies, and even our frenemies. Sometimes, for example, we feel competitive in a conversation. We're trying to outdo the other person. So if they tell us something good that's happened to them in their life or their career, we might feel tempted to one-up them by telling them something that happened to us that's even better. The other person says they got a bonus at work, and you might talk about how you got a bonus and a promotion. Another stereotypical example is how we sometimes compete through the achievements of our organizations or even our children. If someone says how their child is studying pre-law in college and wants to become a lawyer, instead of just listening and appreciating the conversation, we might feel tempted to one-up them by talking about how our child is pre-med in college and they're going to become a brain surgeon. These one-upping comments are trying to assert dominance, higher status, and even control in the conversation. And that's why it's often seen as fairly aggressive and off-putting. When people do this to us, one-upping makes it feel like somebody is trying to put us in a lower place than them. It can take lots of other forms as well, like giving advice when the other person hasn't asked for it. Could be acting as if the other people in the conversation need your approval. For example, one-uppers often play the role of critic or evaluator, and the one-upper expects that other people will satisfy that critique or answer to them in some way. Clearly, any kind of put-downs, little insults, or even subtle wording that positions you above the other person is a one-upping move. Many years ago, when my wife and I first got married, a friend of ours referred to us as kids, like, "Oh, you kids." And it felt a little off in the moment because we were both around 30 years old, and as it turned out, the individual eventually discovered that we were actually a little older than she was. And to her credit, she apologized and told us she was a little embarrassed that she had talked down to us like that. Not long ago, somebody described something I said in a very simple disagreement as, quote, small-minded. Put-downs like that are clearly one-upping moves because they are designed to put people in their place, a lower place. Those are some examples, but there are endless ways to attempt to gain control and dominance in conversations. So what does it mean for you? Well, if you're a competitive person by nature, you should be on the lookout for this tendency to want to one-up other people in conversations. So the first step is to simply not do it. So if the other person starts talking about something that's, let's say, going well for them, and you feel the need to compete, instead, put your ego aside, go into listening mode, ask them good questions, appreciate whatever good news they're sharing with you. There's no requirement that you talk about yourself at all. So to recap, one-upping statements attempt to compete, assert control over the conversation, the person, or the conversational outcomes, and that will clearly be seen as aggressive communication by other people because it escalates the conversation unnecessarily. Second, let's talk about what we call one-across communication, which is the goal if you want to communicate assertively but not aggressively. It's assertive because you're communicating your interests, your needs, your point of view, but you do so in a way that casts yourself and the other person as conversational equals. The primary characteristic of one-across communication is that there are no power moves, no controlling tendencies in the conversation. In other words, step 1 is to resist the temptation to one-up, as we mentioned. The second step is to say what you want to say, and the third step is to invite the other person to voice their interests. Let's start with an everyday example about going out to lunch. A controlling, one-upping version might sound like this: "Hey, we're going to lunch at Grind's Cafe. Let's head out." That could come across as one-upping because it sounds a little bossy and aggressive. It casts the other person as a submissive follower. That statement doesn't create room for discussion. If we start with that same idea and take the power moves out, we would state what we want, but also invite the other person to express what they want to show that we are equals. Here's what that same idea would sound like with a one-across assertive message. Some of us are about to head out to lunch. We are thinking about going to Grind's Cafe. How does that sound to you? It's still fairly direct in terms of conversational assertiveness, but you'll notice that even though I'm stating intentions and preferences, there's no attempt to control the other person, to get them to submit, and I'm also inviting them to voice their perspective. It's assertive without being controlling. The other person has plenty of freedom to say what they want and freedom to bow out of the lunch altogether pretty easily because it's worded as an invitation. Here's some one-across assertive examples for professional settings. From my view, I think our priority moving forward should be to focus on more social media marketing and less traditional advertisements. What do you think our priority should be? After that latest round of interviews, I still prefer candidates D and C. Who are your favorites? You may also notice I'm using plenty of I language in my one-across messages. If you haven't seen that yet, you can watch part 1 about I language by finding the link in the description below this video. So the simple recipe for assertive one-across communication in all of these examples is to first take out any power moves that treat the other person as unequal. And with that mindset, simply communicate your interests clearly and invite the other person to express their interests. You can talk about what you want assertively all day long like this, and as long as you invite the other person to do the same, you'll never be seen as aggressive. Now, on the other side of the coin, many people who struggle with assertiveness tend to communicate with what we call a one-down message. One-down messages are overly deferential, where people are very quick to submit to the other person's power moves in conversations, or they default to a submissive position right from the start, even when the other person invites them to communicate openly. Back to our example about lunch, one-down communication positions you as a lower power, lower status, and submissive person in the conversation. So if somebody asks you, where do you want to go to lunch? You might instantly take a one-down position and say some version of, I don't know, let's go wherever you want to go. Now, granted, sometimes this is true. You may not have a particular preference every time. As long as you don't one-down routinely, then it's fine. But this video is about how to communicate assertively, and a pattern of one-down messages will be seen as others as submissive and passive rather than assertive. The key is to avoid a pattern of one-down communication. And the solution to one-down communication is very similar to what we talked about a moment ago. Step 1 is to ignore the other person's one-upping power move. If they make a power move, then simply ignore that part of the message. Second, express your interest directly. And third, invite the other person to do the same if they have not done so already. Back to an earlier example, if someone communicates a one-up message and says, hey, we're going to lunch at Grind's Cafe, let's head out, you would ignore that power move and simply express your interest. If you're going to Grind's, then I'm going to pass on the invitation, but thank you anyway. That's assertive and clear. You could also suggest another location. I'm not interested in going to Grind's this time, but I would like to try Jitterbugs. And if that feels too direct, you can always invite them again to express their view by adding a simple question. Would you have any interest in that? Or how does that sound? To go back to our examples for professional settings, if the other person one-ups you and says it's really obvious that we should double down on our traditional advertisements, you would ignore the one-upping angle where they say it's really obvious and simply reply with your preferences. I hear you. From my view, I think our priority moving forward should be to focus on more social media marketing and less on traditional advertisements. If they say, I think we should hire candidates A and B, end of story, you would ignore the power move part of that statement, end of story, and say, after the latest round of interviews, I still prefer candidates D and C in that order. And you might give some quick reasons or evidence to support your point of view. Here's a summary of how to communicate assertively with one-across messages and avoid being either aggressive or overly submissive. If other people in the conversation happen to use one-upping messages, you just maintain an assertive one-across approach. As mentioned, this is part 2 in a 5-part series on assertive communication skills. In the next video, I'll show you 5 specific ways to communicate assertively, especially during important one-on-one conversations or in groups for professional settings. Until next time, thanks, God bless, and I'll see you soon.